Remind me to put in a good word for him somewhere else.
Opting for an entirely new lifestyle.
It's how simple it is. Answer them, and please send more, and we'll do another one of these. Thanks very much.
Well, thank goodness for the internet and for things like Netflix and TikTok and all these kinds of mediums that have helped us see the world the way it really is and not just the stereotypes that we have in our mind, which I think is great for us to see each other as human beings. So I love that. I have a huge amount of respect for Korea. During a few years ago, when there was a financial crisis in Japan and in Korea, the way that Korea dealt with it was the opposite, where Japan restrained and implemented austerity. Korea spent money and invested heavily in its income, in its economy rather. And the recovery was astonishing. And I think that's symbolic of who the Korean people are, which is whether it's good times or hard times, they invest. They see the future and they work for that future rather than reacting to the current state. And I think that's very impressive for a people, and quite the opposite to most of the world, quite frankly. So what I find so interesting about this subject is that people think that the people who work with us at work are different than the people we know anywhere else. The reality is 100% of employees are people, 100% of customers are people, 100% of investors are people. In other words, if you don't understand people, you don't understand business. And whether we're interacting with people in our personal lives or we're interacting with people in our professional lives, the way that we build trust is the same. And so if you have friends or if you meet somebody who you want to, you fancy, and maybe one day you imagine marrying them or dating them, and you want to build trust, you don't do it by constantly taking and putting yourself first. You hold doors open and you're polite and you think of them and you remember their birthday and you say good morning before you check your telephone, for example. And in the course of time, nobody knows exactly how long, and it's different for everybody else. At some point, trust evolves, and then deep trust evolves. And you have that psychological safety that that person trusts you. It's the same at work. If we constantly put our careers ahead of everybody else, we only concern ourselves with our safety and our happiness and our success, then what that does is it creates an environment in which other people will do the same. Leaders are in a position where they actually set the culture. So if the leader constantly prioritizes themselves, so will everybody else in the organization. And that doesn't make for a very strong cooperative organization. But if people see that the leader is willing to sometimes sacrifice their interests for the good of the team, sometimes that means working late or making a short-term financial hit for the long-term gain, or just simply being empathetic. If somebody's performance is struggling, instead of yelling at them and telling them that they're stupid and there's something wrong with them, instead to go up to them and say, "Are you okay? I'm worried about you. This is not like you." This is what starts to build trust. And when we build trust, we will offer our blood and sweat and tears to see that our leaders and our companies excel. We want to. It would make us proud to see them do well. The reality is too many people go to work and fear their leaders. And they have to spend time protecting themselves from their leaders, which means they're taking time and energy away from doing their jobs, taking time and energy away from serving the customer, taking time and energy away from looking after the other people in the organization. And so when we do not have to fear our leaders, when we have that psychological safety, which is exactly the same thing as a circle of safety, in a circle of safety, we have psychological safety, then all of a sudden, trust, cooperation, and remarkable things happen. I had the opportunity to visit, it's called Officer Candidate School, which is where the United States Marine Corps selects its officers, selects its leaders. And one of the things that they watch for is when a group is working as a team, they're looking to see that everybody gives the leader their best ideas. And if the leader doesn't choose your idea, you don't just sort of back off and say, forget this, then I'm not going to help. But you give all of your energy to see that the leader's choice, the leader's direction is successful. And if it fails, you don't say, well, I told you so. You work hard to put it right and see that the leader is successful and that the group is successful. In other words, you give your best advice, but once the decision is made, we work tirelessly as a team to achieve success regardless. And if the leader was wrong, a good leader will come back and say, I was wrong. You were right. I will listen to you more next time. And it's that relationship that's built. But the point is, we want to see our leaders succeed, and our leaders want to see us succeed. And it's that relationship. However, the leaders has to go first. This is why we call you leader. We don't call you leader because you're more senior in the hierarchy. That just gives you authority. And I know many people who sit at top levels of organizations who are not leaders. We do as they tell us because they have authority over us, but we don't trust them and we wouldn't follow them. And yet I know many people at low levels of organizations who have no formal authority, but they've made the choice to look after the person to the left of them and look after the person to the right of them, and we trust them and follow them anywhere. And so it was required for the person in a position of leadership to go first. In other words, I've never heard a great leader ever say, prove to me why I should trust you. But rather, the leader trusts first and then earns the trust back from the people. The leader sets out to see that their people are successful, and in return, the people will work tirelessly to see that the leader is successful. We call you leader because you take those risks first. That's why you earn the higher salary and the additional perks. Those things don't come for free. There's a cost for those things. And those costs are that you have to take some of the risks to trust first sometimes. The closest thing, the closest analogy to good leadership is good parenting. That's exactly it, which is I will do everything that I can to see that the person in my care will be successful, that they will rise. I will teach them skills. I will discipline them when necessary. I will let them scrape their knees sometimes so they'll learn their lesson, but I will always be there to support them no matter what, and I will do it with love. This is the same as leadership. And just like a good parent, a parent always feeds their child before they feed themselves. That's just how it works. And it's the same with good leadership, which is I will make sure that my people are taken care of before I consider my well-being. And what that ends up doing is it earns love, it earns trust, and we want to make our parents proud, and we want to make our leaders proud when that relationship, when that dynamic exists. One of my favorite leaders, her name is Laurie Robinson, as no matter how senior she got, she always referred to those in her charge, those who were subordinate to her, as my kids, even if they were older than her. She always referred to them as my kids. I got to take care of my kids. So it's a great analogy. There are four primary hormones in our body that are responsible for all of our feelings and all of our behaviors. Endorphins, dopamine, serotonin, and oxytocin, as you said. Endorphins basically have one purpose and one purpose only, which is to mask physical pain. And most people who've done heavy exercise have experienced a runner's high, an endorphin rush. And basically you push your body harder than you're used to and you feel great. The next day you're in extreme pain because you hurt your body, you ripped your muscles. But those endorphins exist to protect us for fight or flight. That if we're in going back historical times to the early days of humankind, if we're travailing the plains looking for food, or if we're being chased by a wild animal, that we're more likely to survive because we can push our bodies even harder than we expect. That's the basic role of endorphins. And the main way we get endorphins in our modern day is predominantly from exercise. Dopamine is the feeling you get when we find something we're looking for, or we accomplish something we wanted to accomplish. So when you lose your keys and you're like, where are my keys? And then you find them, here they are, that little feeling of elation, that's dopamine. Or when you hit your goal, yes, or win the game, yes. You know, that experience, that rush of accomplishment is dopamine. Even when your phone, when you get a text that comes in or an email comes in, that little bit of excitement, that's all dopamine. Um, and the purpose of dopamine was to help us find food, which is we're very visual animals. This is why it's important to write down your goals. We like metrics because we like to count how close we are getting to our metrics. You know, in the early days of humankind, we would see food in the distance, a tree with fruit on it in the distance. We get excited, and we can see it getting bigger and bigger as we get closer and closer, which makes us work harder and harder, just like at work. As we approach our goals, it gets very exciting. And then eventually we find what we're looking for, and we get a rush of excitement. This is the chemical that helps us get things done, to achieve things, to find things. That's what dopamine does. Dopamine is also highly addictive. You have to be careful. If it's unbalanced in a system, if the primary means in which we incentivize our employees is only hit the goal, get the bonus, hit the goal, get the bonus, hit the goal, get the bonus, we can accidentally create an environment in which people become addicted to performance. Well, that sounds good in theory, except like any addiction, whether it's alcohol or drugs or a cell phone or social media addiction, it destroys relationships, it destroys trust, and in time, it'll actually destroy the organization. Those two chemicals are predominantly selfish. In other words, we don't need anybody's help to get them. Go for a run or accomplish your goals and you'll feel good. But the problem is those feelings don't last. Endorphin rush doesn't last, and a dopamine hit doesn't last. No one is walking around with an amazing sense of accomplishment for that goal you hit a year ago. And that's why we have the other chemicals, serotonin and oxytocin. They are the social chemicals. They are the selfless chemicals. They will help us create relationships and survive as human animals, as social animals. Serotonin, I like to call the leadership chemical. It's the feeling of pride. It's the feeling we get when we have status, for example. So when you graduate university and you feel proud and you feel amazing as you collect your diploma, or when you get into the school of your choice, you feel this sense of pride, or you get a promotion and you feel like your status is raising. But the best part of serotonin is that when you feel proud that you just graduated university or got into the school of your choice or got the job of your choice, your parents also feel proud, or your mentor also feels proud, or your leader also feels proud. In other words, the chemical is shared. I believed in you and trusted in you, and you wanted to make me proud, and we share in that. It is pro-social. It's about taking care of each other so that you can advance. And serotonin is essential in any leadership or any organization. It's about helping each other. And then the final one is oxytocin. And you talked about crying and your kids. Oxytocin is all of the unicorns and rainbows. It's all the mushy stuff. It's love and puppies and all of that stuff. There are many ways to get oxytocin. One is this, physical touch, which is why when someone is in pain, we hold them, we give them a hug. And it feels nice when we're in pain that someone holds us and says, it's okay, I'm here for you. It's why it's important to hug your children a lot. It's important to hold hands with somebody you love. You're actually exchanging oxytocin. You're actually releasing oxytocin in your body that makes you feel warm and connected. But there's another wonderful way to get oxytocin, which is acts of kindness and acts of generosity. I was walking down the streets of New York City, and the person in front of me, their backpack opened up and paper spilled out on the street. I bent down and picked up the papers, handed it back to the person, pointed out that their bag had opened. He turned around to me and said, "Thank you." I said, "You're welcome." An act of generosity with no expectation of anything in return. I didn't want him to give me any money or anything. I mean, I was happy to do it, right? I felt good. He felt good. I got a little shot of oxytocin for the act of generosity. He got a little shot of oxytocin when somebody did something nice for him with no expectation of anything in return. I went on with my day and got to the end of the street, and I was waiting to cross the road, and a total stranger who happened to have seen what I did turned around to me and said, "That was really nice of you." As it turns out, witnessing an act of generosity releases oxytocin. So he felt good. And the best thing about oxytocin is the more oxytocin we have in our bodies, the more generous we become. In other words, I guarantee you that man actually went off and did something nice for somebody that day just because he saw me do something nice for somebody that day. This is the human body's desperate attempt to get us to look after each other. And this is why when we talk about leaders modeling behavior or acting by example, it's true, which is when we see our leaders doing good things, it actually biologically makes us want to do good things. When we see our leaders worrying about how we feel, we worry about how our teammates feel. It creates an environment in which we want to take care of each other and see each other grow. And the most important thing about serotonin and oxytocin is that they're social. You need other people to get them. Can you hijack those systems? Yes, you can. There are unhealthy ways to get them, of course, in this modern day and age, of course. Like getting more followers and getting more likes will absolutely boost your serotonin. The problem is it's fake. You don't actually form relationships by doing that. But the reality is understanding that strong work environments where innovation and cooperation and taking care of each other happen requires more than simply offering people a goal and an opportunity and a bonus to hit it. It's about understanding the whole human being. Every generation brings strengths and weaknesses based on how they were raised and the experiences they had growing up. The experiences of how, what Korea looked like when one generation was young is very different than what Korea looks like today. And so there's no such thing as one size fits all, but what they do all have in common is they're all human beings. And how we build trust and how we create relationships is still the same. And the reality is, a strong argument could be made that not just millennials, but probably disproportionately higher numbers of millennials have developed addiction to their cell phones or their social media. In other words, yes, to your point, they have the feelings of friendship and love and serotonin and oxytocin pouring through the screen. The problem is it's not necessarily 100% real, because they may be standing there thinking this is the most important thing and I'm pouring my heart out. And the person on the other end might be with a group of people eating a hot dog and sort of half paying attention. And if that were real life, you wouldn't have that outpouring of emotion. You wouldn't think that you're forming a strong bond, because you're not. And so it creates disparity where one person thinks they're forming a strong bond, except the strong bond actually isn't there. And so you can get very surprised that when you think someone will be there for you, it turns out they won't be. When you think someone loves you, it turns out they don't. And that can really shake our confidence. And so it's not a question of digital or not digital, which is how we form relationships is exactly the same and hasn't changed in tens of thousands of years. And so the question is how do we understand those dynamics in a digital world? There are huge advantages, of course. When you have family around the world, that you can turn on FaceTime and grandchildren can have conversations with grandparents who are, hundreds of miles away. That's wonderful and powerful. But those relationships also pre-exist. But it's very difficult to form a relationship from scratch and have deep trust. Do you have some trust? Absolutely. Deep trust, more difficult, requires a lot more work. And we've seen that during COVID, during quarantines. Some people joined a company during quarantine, and it's hard to feel like a part of the culture and be fully integrated with other teammates who knew each other before quarantine. We've seen it happen. Now, is it impossible? No, but it's diminished. And so I think we have to recognize that sometimes young people, despite what they may think or say, are struggling to form deep, meaningful relationships. So we at work can create those environments, especially when we start to go back to work, and finding the right balance. And you'll hear me use that word a lot. I never believe that it's this or that. And it's not always the same for one person as it is for another. But there are such things as balances. There are such things as equilibriums. And there are such things as paying attention that some people might need a little more attention than others. But the reality is, it's not that young people have a magic ability to form deep trust over a device. They don't, because no one does. So it requires extra work, actually. We have to remember that, which is we forget that relationships and friendships and trust don't happen in the meeting. They happen between the meetings. It's when you see someone in the hall, or you get lunch together, or you go out for a cup of coffee, or you have a meeting, or you go into a meeting and somebody's running a little late, and so there's some chit chat, and then you're still talking when you walk out of the meeting. It's all these little seemingly innocuous interactions that over the course of time start to build the relationship. And when we have a purely digital work environment, all of those little casual interactions disappear. We only have the meeting. And so one of the things we have to do to try and bring some of the balance back is we have to actually be more prescriptive about it. It actually has to be a little bit artificial. So, for example, one of the things we do is every Monday morning we have a team huddle where we all come on Zoom and we go around the room and we simply talk about what's on your heart and what's on your mind. And we do not talk about work. We never ask anybody about a project. We don't talk about numbers. There's no talk of work. And people talk about all kinds of things. They talk about what they did over the weekend. They say that they're happy. They say that they're sad. And we answer a fun or poignant question. And the most important thing is we're starting to see each other as human beings. We learn things about each other. I didn't even know that they had children. I found out they had 2 kids because they told me they went to the zoo this weekend, for example, or whatever it is. And so you have to be more prescriptive. Some of our team members would work together. They would have study hours where they would turn on their screens and they would just do work, but just nice to have someone there with a little interactions. Or some of them would have dinner together or lunch together. And again, we're artificially creating these social interactions, and it really does help. Is it as good as in person? Of course not. But is it a very acceptable second best? Yes. But it has to be prescriptive. And a lot of companies, I think, that have struggled the most, where it's all work all the time, every time I interact with somebody. You turn on Zoom, you show up, you have the meeting, you turn off Zoom. So we have to find little ways. And I think the future of work is going to be some sort of blended model. Obviously, some people find more productivity at home. But at the end of the day, we have to come to work now and then to have that social interaction. I think what will probably end up happening is it'll become more flexible. Where in the past, I used to have to ask permission 2 weeks in advance to work from home next Friday, where now I can just, Thursday night send out an email saying I'm going to be working from home tomorrow because I got a thing with my kids, and everybody will be fine with it. So I think ultimately where the dust will settle, work won't look like what it used to work. It won't look like what it looks like now. It'll be some sort of blended model, and I think people and companies will be better off for it. Definitely COVID was amazing. We had to pivot our business very quickly. Obviously most of our income came from live events, and that dried up immediately. And we pivoted our business in 2 weeks. We did months worth of work in 2 weeks. It was kind of an amazing thing to see happen. And we invented an entirely new business in 6 weeks. And so to see the team come together and rally like that with love and care, it was intense and it was magical. It was hard work for sure, but it was an amazing thing to see. Oh, by the way, one of the things that releases oxytocin is shared struggle. So when you go through hard things with other people, it actually makes you closer. So that definitely happened. It's hard to pick one instance that made me feel that. But I'm brought to tears when I see people who are willing to sacrifice their interests for the good of others. I'm brought to tears by service and stories of service, whether my teams or people I've met or even just stories I hear. But definitely when they're from the team, it makes me proud that we actually do the things that we talk about. Yeah, we are social animals and we all need each other. My definition of faith is knowing that you're on a team, even if you don't know who all the players are. And I think that to see ourselves as not only having the strength to ask for help when we need it, but also having the strength to offer help when we see that others need it is what makes great organizations great. And so I'll offer the same closing that I believe is important for all human beings, which is take care of yourself and take care of each other.